Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Andrew Sykes. I'm chairman of FFI, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this wonderful venue for our 2019 spring reception. We're going to have a fabulous series of speakers talking about the work that Fauna and Flora does in tree conservation, and it's fabulous to have an event about the flora bit of Fauna and Flora, so I'm really looking forward to that. The proceedings are going to start, I'm delighted to say, with James Wong, who's one of our vice presidents. James probably needs very little introduction. Ethnobotanist, author, broadcaster, prolific author, one book just out, but I've forgotten the name. He's told me he'd forgotten the name, but I think it's 10 Things to Eat Better and Cook Them Better. Anyway, he'll tell you in a minute, probably. So he's going to start off, and then we're going to have a series of wonderful speakers. So please welcome James Wong.
Thanks. Hi, guys. So I should probably start with a little confession. And it's kind of weird for a scientist to confess this, kind of particularly in front of a whole room of scientists. But I believe that I have a psychic ability. Oh, yes. And it's not like that octopus in a German zoo that could accurately predict the World Cup scores from the last World Cup. It's not like that, because he died. I don't want to be like that. It's not like I could predict the stock market or the lottery or like whether Brexit will happen after the vote tonight. I can't do any useful stuff like that. The one thing I can do, though, situationally dependent, and it happens like 95 to 100% of the time, is that if someone finds out what I do, I can tell you the first question they will ask me. And that first question will be, you're a botanist. So what made you first interested in plants? Did you have like a grandparent that would take you out into the garden and show you plants? Or maybe, does it run in your family? Or did you have like a really impressionable teacher at school that would talk to you about plants? Why are you like this? How are you interested in plants? And I get this question so often that I actually had to call up my big brother who's obsessed with football. And I had to say to him, Paul, has anyone actually asked you why you're interested in football? Has anyone ever said, was there a PE teacher in school that made you think football was interesting? Or does football interest run in your family? No one has ever said that to him. And what that shows, it's a loaded question. And it doesn't matter who asks me. It could be like my Uber driver, it could be a journalist, it can be like a stranger down the pub. It happens every time. And that's because people assume that plants are boring and that football somehow is interesting. And for me, I'm one of those people that I want to flip the question the other way around. I want to be like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you find plants interesting? Because as an ethnobotanist, I know that literally every aspect of our basic biology, our culture, our instincts, they're all based to make us better botanists. So, for example, we can see more shades of green than we can any other color, with a ridiculous amount of precision. That's why if you've ever got a night vision function on your phone or binoculars, it's always green. You know the reason why it's green? It could be any set of monochrome colors, apparently. It's green because it's much easier to see that image because you can distinguish between the different shades of green. And what that meant, in the deep evolutionary past, when we were running around the Serengeti, being able to tell different shades of green meant we could be more accurate at identifying plants between poisonous ones and safe ones. Not only can we tell different shades of green, we can actually pick out red objects with ridiculous ability against a green backdrop. So, for example, if you're picking strawberries, if you've ever been picking strawberries with a colorblind person, I actually ran a little trial on this. You know what? They're looking for the shape. They have no color ability. They come back after an hour really pissed off with you and with very few strawberries. Whereas I am eating through the second bucket of the day. So there's this really weird thing, if we look at art, the only icon in art that is totally universal, that's been found consistently in every human known culture, even Arabic art, where some types of Arabic art prohibit the depiction of living things, so they have tessellations, even in those, the flower is the only universal object of beauty across cultures. Every aspect of our biology makes us find plants interesting. And yet there is one plant science student for every 500 animal science students. There is now 0 botany degrees in the UK, and I know that a bunch of you are probably going to say that's because we have plant science now. I'd argue that a large reason why we call it plant science is because even on plant science courses, if you use the word botany on the title, people are less likely to take it. There's people who've selected to study plant science. They're less likely to take it if the B word is in the title. And that's not Brexit. It's the botany. You can't take it. There is a fundamental flaw of what's going on here. And I think, to be able to override our biology, the only reason can be an incredible cultural failing on the part of people who study plants, people like myself. When you first study plants at school or first study biology at school, what are you looking at? If it's animals, it might be like David Attenborough explaining the miracle of life unfolding in front of you as wildebeest are chased down by, I don't know anything about animals, something that eats wildebeests. And in plants, the first thing you see, and maybe not nowadays, but when I was a kid, is the photosynthesis diagram on a board. I'm a botanist. I can't even draw the photosynthesis diagram. There is a major, major problem with understanding this. And you might think that that's quite a negative message for me to be saying, particularly since I'm saying it about you guys and myself. The botanists are amazing communicators down the pub, but often not so great at conferences. Or when you interview them, they tend to revert to grant application speak as opposed to human speak. You might think that's a negative thing, but I think it's a resoundingly positive thing. Because unlike other threats in other industries, if it's our own fault, we can control it. We can change that. And we're going to change that starting right here, right now, because we've had the best plant communicators flown in from across the world. It's like an Avengers ensemble gathered here today. And so I'm going to shut the hell up because they are much more interesting. We're starting with Dave from the Cambridge office of FFI. Thanks, guys.
I'm inspired personally. I don't know about you. Good evening, everybody. It's my great pleasure to kick off the FFI part of the night. And I'm very pleased to set the scene for what is going to be, after me, 3 fantastic talks that really celebrate some fantastic work for some of the world's most charismatic megaflora. Tonight, we will take you on a journey around the world to meet some remarkable trees under the stewardship of some equally remarkable conservationists. We'll get to know the awesome araucarias of Brazil, some beautiful but slightly bloated Baobabs from Madagascar, and from the lush and luxuriant rainforests of St. Lucia, the lesser known but locally much loved Lanson tree. But before we start on the trees, I also have a confession to tell you, and I am not a psychic either. My confession is at this event all about tree conservation, that I am in fact a zoologist. I'm sorry, but we'll get through this together. My first experience in wildlife conservation came from Paraguay, and I focused on frogs. That was a long time ago. It's over 10 years ago now, but I still have very striking memories of the frogs from that forest, as well as the brightly colored toucans, snakes, and beetles that crossed my path. But if you were to ask me, can you remember one particular tree species that you were particularly fond of? They must have been amazing. I have to be honest that the answer is I can't remember a single species. And when I try to really force my memory, the only image that comes to mind is one of a hazy, generic picture of a forest. Now, some of you here may have recognized my symptoms. I was suffering from a terrible case of plant blindness. And as James has introduced tonight, this is very common. It's an inability to see the difference between individual plants and trees. And such a failure to do so is not trivial. As conservationists, or everybody in this room will know just how important forests are. We're very good at that. But we're much, much less good at understanding the importance between individual species of trees. I believe this failure has two main consequences. Firstly, if we fail to celebrate and see the differences between tree species, we also fail to realize and build upon the very real values that people have for different types of trees. I believe that as much as any animal species, trees can fill us with a sense of wonder and reverence. They characterize our favorite landscapes. Some even stir up childhood memories. And they are, above all, the great providers. Different trees give us different timbers, different medicines, and different foods. Why wouldn't we want to build our conservation programs around such species? The second consequence is much more sobering. If we fail to pay attention to detail, we risk losing many tree species before we got the chance to get to know them. Thanks to our partners, Botanic Gardens Conservation International, we know the current state of play is that 10,000 of the world's 60,000 tree species are threatened with extinction. That number is more than the world's mammals, or more than the world's threatened mammals, birds, amphibians, and reptiles combined. It's a colossal task. You'll be familiar with some of the reasons why trees are in such trouble. They're losing their most important habitats. Where those habitats remain, the most valuable species, such as rosewoods, ebonies, mahoganies, are being cut down at unprecedented rates. As the climate changes around trees, some species, and some much more than others, will struggle to keep up. And this is an unusual one that doesn't cross everybody's mind, but many tree species out there are failing to reproduce. As we increasingly share and use tree habitat, the seedlings that should be emerging from the forest floor to replenish tree populations over time are being eaten by livestock, they're being outfought by invasive species, and they're being replaced as people use that same space for shade crops such as coffee and cardamom. Those species, without regeneration, are effectively a living dead. They're here today, but unless we can do something about it, they won't be here in the long term. So I'm very happy to report that my own plant blindness has long been cured. And my 7 years at FFI, seeing some amazing and diverse range of tree projects under the management of some very passionate tree conservationists, has been the best possible medicine. I'm proud to work for an organization that has long stood up for individual species of trees. If you look through the archives, we've worked in Mexican palms in the 70s, we've worked with mahoganies in the 80s, and rosewoods and ebonies in the 90s. But it was in 1999 that our efforts to save trees really stepped up. We founded the Global Trees Campaign, an initiative dedicated to increasing action for trees. We run this in partnership with Botanic Gardens Conservation International, and together we use our complementary skills and approaches and huge networks of partners around the world. And we work towards a mission of conserving threatened tree species within their natural habitat. And since 1999, our work has grown, and to use my first tree pun of the evening, has branched out significantly over that time. Through the very generous support of Fondation Franklinia, we have supported conservation action for 144 different threatened tree species over that time in 25 different countries. Along each step along the way, we have supported our local conservationists we work with to provide skills and knowledge that they are better able to do tree conservation long term. And we've trained more than 1,100 conservationists over that time. behind those figures, there's a different story behind them. And I just wanted to run through some of the kind of key different ways that FFI does tree conservation. So firstly, it's about taking emergency interventions for those species on the edge. Think of the panda equivalent of trees. Magnolia sinica here, when we first started working on this beautiful tree back in 2005, was down to 11 known individuals. We worked in partnership with local nature reserves, with local scientists, put protection in place and started planting work. There's more than 200 of these trees now growing in southern China under local protection, and it is on the road to recovery. We also work to protect particular habitats precisely because they are important for some fascinating tree species. We work in the places that other people may not work in, but we say these are very important for individual trees. So, for example, the fruit and nut forests of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. FFI is helping to support the conservation of 160,000 hectares of that forest because it contains some unbelievable tree species. It contains the wild relatives of apples, pears, apricots, walnuts, and almonds that we're all familiar with. Many of these species are threatened, and many are found nowhere else in the world. Recognizing that tree conservation can be quite technical, we have an explicit focus on capacity building. For example, our work in Belize, we're supporting protected areas with developing skills to identify different tree species, which isn't always easy, to monitor them, and to ensure protection is carried out in the right places. And one last example. We recognize that really not enough people are carrying out action for trees, and we're trying to build a movement so that much more people are doing so. So in Indonesia, for example, where the majority of conservation resources and attention goes towards tigers, elephants, and orangutans, we are providing an effective complementary voice to stand up for the country's trees, more than 100 species of which are critically endangered. So we banded together the leading scientists and NGOs around Indonesia, and together we effectively influenced the government to develop its first ever national action plan for its most threatened tree species. And as a result of that plan, people are responding. Local NGOs and protected areas on the ground are focusing on species such as magnolia, durian, and ironwood, helping ensure that those tree species start to share some of the attention traditionally reserved for Indonesia's better-known animals. But all of this, of course, is just a snapshot of what we do. And I wanted to now hand over to 3 inspiring tree conservationists who are going to tell you their own story. Firstly, in Brazil, my colleague Victoria Price is going to come on. Victoria has worked for FFI's tree program for 5 years and has managed some of our most effective conservation projects. She's going to tell the story of Pablo Hoffman, our partner from Brazil, who sadly couldn't be here tonight. I'm very happy now to introduce Victoria, who's going to tell you that story.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave, and good evening, everyone. I'll try not to shout at you. So to my first slide, this mysterious man you can not really see the face of is Pablo Hoffman. Pablo was born in 1970s in southern Brazil. In his childhood, he tells us he remembers huge, towering trees that he used to look up and admire like a cathedral in nature. And he used to go to these small fragments, but unfortunately, he witnessed the loss of the last great fragments of the Araucaria forest in Brazil. When he got older, after training as a conservation biologist, he noticed the increasing rarity of these trees that he loved so much and became frustrated. So in 2003, he set up his own NGO with his friends called Sociedade Xauá. Now, to do this, he set up a nursery in his own back garden, worked around the clock as a volunteer to get it off the ground. This is one of the trees from Pablo's childhood forests. It's a candelabra tree. It's a very close relative of the monkey puzzle that you might know quite well from gardens around the UK and the rest of the world. And it's one of the few native conifers to Brazil. What I find remarkable about this tree are these pinhãos here, which are the pine cones. They're absolutely huge. They weigh on average 2 kilograms. And from the point that they're pollinated to which they ripen can take 24 months. Now that's a longer brewing time than an elephant calf. But pinhãos aren't just important because of the impressive stats. It's also about the animals that rely upon them. The time of year in which pinhãos are dispersed from the tree is winter. It's when not many other trees are fruiting in the forest. And they do it on a huge scale. Each branch can have hundreds of these pine cones. So they've become really important to forest animals in the Araucaria forest, including at least 14 mammals that we know feed on them, and many threatened birds. Now, this is a near-threatened azure jay, and it's really closely associated with the piranha pine because it takes each individual pine nut and it will stash it around the forest for leaner months, very much like the Eurasian jay and the oaks that we have here in Europe. But these pine cones aren't just important to animals, they're also really important to people. The pine cone harvest every year is celebrated with enthusiasm. There's festivals all around the country and in other South American countries to celebrate the time of year. And in fact, 3,400 tons of these pine cones are harvested from the wild every season. Now, they're not just important because people enjoy to eat them. It's a cultural event for people. People gather around the fire just as it's turning into winter and eat them toasted over the hot fire with salt and sometimes even put them in wine. So it's a really important food source and really culturally important and connected to that time of year. So, despite its importance to people, to the pine cones themselves, it's also really been heavily exploited for wood. Araucaria is one of the most valuable tree species in Brazil, and in the past century, it triggered a frighteningly quick decline of the wood, of the tree species. Year on year, more than 1 million cubic meters were being exported in ships back to Europe. The loss was so great that this meant that our candelabra tree is now critically endangered. But that's not all. Because the candelabra tree was a really important tree in the forest, it's a dominant tree, there's lots of them, until they're all logged out. So once this valuable timber source had gone, and the other timbers along with it, rapid deforestation followed. Most of the forest was converted into ranches, as you might expect, arable cropland, or even small cities. And the forest declined by 97% in the past century. So this is what Pablo was responding to when he set up his NGO back in 2003. But in 2011, he secured crucial funding from Fundación Franklínia to try and turn things around. So Shawar took a very methodical approach to this. They studied the candelabra tree in great detail. They looked for the ecological characteristics, when they flower, when they fruit, and what the habitat was required for them to grow properly. And they used this knowledge to collect seeds, which is a bit challenging when it's a tree, grow seedlings before planting them back out into the forest. But going back to the candelabra tree, in its shrinking habitat, there was such a huge loss of habitat, we sadly knew it was not the only one. The Araucaria forest is home to more than 350 remarkable tree species, including rare mahoganies, silk trees, and palms. And I don't know about you, but who says plant babies can't be cute? So with support from FFI, Shawar have been replicating this approach for many of these species in need. We're now growing more than 198 species in that nursery that Pablo set up in Brazil. And so far, I guess I've probably presented you a story you might have expected to come in here tonight. Find a rare tree, plant it, grow it, save it. But actually, what's remarkable about Shawar is that they've gone beyond this. It's not just about saving the candelabra tree, or even the other 3 tree species I've just mentioned. They recognize there's a real dearth of diversity in restoration planting across Brazil. And if we think about restoration planting in Brazil, it's almost a national pastime. The Brazilian government have set a target by 2030. They want to restore 14 million hectares of forests, of trees. So there's a lot of opportunity there and a lot of planting going on. But most people plant common tree species, cheap tree species to plant, and even non-native tree species. So Showa recognized that a step change was needed, and that their efforts alone of growing a few tree species in their nursery isn't really going to be enough. Now, I think Pablo wouldn't mind me saying that he's not really a people person, but he realized there was a real need to step up to this challenge. So he's been working with teams at FFI, and over the past few years, he's really been dedicating himself to reaching out to people, make new networks, speak to farmers that he was a little bit scared of, if he was at all honest, speak to other NGOs, and most crucially, influential government nurseries that supply a lot of these restoration projects. So as of 2018, we now have 6 new tree nurseries and 27 organizations or landowners, all planting threatened trees within their restoration projects that they had not been planting before. And this is all down to Pablo's dedication. What this has led to is the reinforcement of a minimum of 30 species. This is us being conservative. We use more than 25,000 seedlings. And so what is really impressive about this is the 90% survival rate that I've put up here. It's something we're really proud of. Working in tree conservation day in, day out, I can tell you that's no small feat. And it's really impressive. And what it's led to, what these 2 figures mean, is that there's now real representation across restoration planting in Parana State, where Showa are based. So Showa have grown from a small voice, really focused on technical issues affecting 1 or 2 tree species, to be an important regional influencer where they are. They are a voice for proactive, representative restoration of the forest. And they're actually being heard. Pablo, finally you get to see his face. Pablo has been invited by the state government to inform how they do tree conservation across Parana State. So he'll be helping devise what everyone does in the next few years. He's also been sharing his knowledge as widely as possible, and he's really passionate about that. He's written chapters for books for Brazilian restoration. He's wrote papers, and he's also been writing manuals that share widely across the globe that's supposed to be easy for access for practitioners. He's really trying to make that change greater. So, in summing this up, I think when Pablo first set out as a young graduate to try and make a change and see those tree species that he's loved return back to the wild, he didn't really ever dream that he'd get to the lengths that he has, that he'd have hundreds of species growing, and he will have actually made an effective change. And he would have said that himself. But now he's turned into an ambitious, outward-looking champion for trees. And it just goes to show what one person with a small amount of passion can do, and how actually tree conservation of species is important. Thank you very much.
I think we've lost a clicker. I'm sure it'll come back in a second. I'm not meant to have favorites, but I love that tree. It's beautiful. So what we learned there was a lot related to restoration and how so much tree planting is happening in Brazil and how we've tried to influence that. But I think one lesson from tonight is that tree conservation is not just about tree planting, and actually it involves many, many other things. And our next speaker tonight is going to show you something completely different, a different way of doing tree conservation. I'm very pleased to introduce her partner from Madagascar, Judy Hanta Razafamanik. Judy first came into contact in FFI back in 2005 when she won an award under FFI and their partners' conservation leadership program. She joined the NGO Madagascar Vacage, working her way through the ranks until she became director in 2011. I'm very pleased to introduce Judy to the stage, who will further her introduction and tell you all about her work to conserve threatened baobabs.
Good evening, everyone. So as Dave said, I'm Judy, I'm from Madagascar. And I think one of the things, I would tell you a very different story because I really love the story Victoria was talking about Pablo, but I have a very different story, probably confirming what Dave said about the plant blindness. Because when I actually went into conservation and wanted to be more involved in conservation when I was 13, when I first heard the voice of the Indri, which is the largest lemur of Madagascar and has such a really nice voice that I'm sure anyone who have been in Madagascar or who are planning to go to Madagascar should just take the time to listen to, and you'll fall in love with them. So I first saw the Baobabs when I was only 23, but between the time when I saw the Indris, I got more interested on Madagascar biodiversity, and one of the things I really loved as a kid and up to now is traveling. So I would go anywhere that is cool and you could have adventure and you could meet new people and you could see more biodiversity. But I couldn't really do that as I was growing up. And actually one of the big difference between me and Pablo was that I grew up in a city. I didn't really know, in Tana, the capital of Madagascar, I didn't really know about trees. The only trees I knew when I was a kid was the jacaranda, which has been planted in Tana. And what it would, for me, it meant when it was flowering, then you would start school. And when the flowers start falling down, that would be Christmas holidays. And that's more or less what I knew about trees when I was a kid. So my first encounter with the baobabs was only when I was 23, but I think the beauty of the trees in Madagascar, and I'm sure it's everywhere, is they would look like when you see them on the pictures. It's very different with the Indris, the lemurs, or any bats. I was doing some projects on bats as well. You would expect to see them in this patch of the forest, but then you get there, they are not there. They would go in this side. But the trees, they were there, and they are beautiful. And I think that's one of the reasons why we invested more into the baobab conservation. I just love this project. But one of the sad things in Madagascar, and this stat actually just showed up yesterday on the internet, which was showing that Madagascar is now the poorest country in Africa. Over 77% of the population are living under the poverty line. And one of the reasons for that is that Madagascar, there's an ongoing conflict between biodiversity and people. And I strongly believe that biodiversity is one of the assets of Madagascar. I'm sure at least half of you would like to go to Madagascar, and you would be bringing income for the country as a tourist, but also the communities living in the rural areas in Madagascar are really strongly linked with the biodiversity we have, the forest as a source of water, sometimes as bushmeat, which could actually be managed, and the baobabs also are one of the most very important trees for the communities living close to them. So I am very proud to be part of Madagascar Vacage, an organization that was founded in 2005, where it has actually been created by a team of biologists who are working on bats, chameleons, frog. That's why our logo of 3 different animals, but just 1 tree. And at that time, we didn't really know what we are going to do about this tree, but we just think it's Madagascar. Vacage has 2 meanings in Malagasy word. It can mean conserved, but it also can mean calculated. So we have been creating this organization because we have been a group of researchers who were doing great research and publishing papers. And in these papers, we had a list of recommendations that would be very good for biodiversity of the country and also the people in the country. But we realized that, so we did the research between 2002 and 2005, and we keep doing research at the moment. What we realized was actually nobody was implementing the recommendations we were given because they didn't really make any sense. There was a gap between the research and the actions on the ground. So the aim for FOCADI was then to implement these actions, but also to give opportunities for students in Madagascar to develop their career, because it happens a lot that people working in, students doing biology, ecology, or in the biodiversity conservation area don't find any jobs, so end up working in banks or becoming miners or something else. And we are just losing the potential to conserve the biodiversity. Madagascar FOCADI started with only 8 people at the beginning. At the moment, we are about 52 team members. And what really unites us is the love for the biodiversity, of course, but also these pictures show the children of the staff members, knowing that Madagascar is the poorest country in Africa at the moment. We don't want our children to be living that and that keeping going. Also, we want our children to be able to see the injuries, the baobabs, and other biodiversity of the country, and we want them to be proud of our biodiversity, as I am today. So that's one of the things that really links us together. So we are running projects all over the country, but I'm going to talk today only about the baobabs, which anyone who have been in Madagascar or willing to go to Madagascar, I'm sure you would want to see them. There are 9 species of baobabs in the world. 7 of them are found in Madagascar, and 6 actually you cannot find anywhere else in the world than in Madagascar. Unfortunately, 3 of these 6 species are listed as threatened for the many reasons Dave has mentioned before, and one of them and the Crandidias baobab is listed on the CITES, which means it can be traded, but under regulations. So I'm going to talk particularly of the Renal, or the Crandidias baobab, which you can find only on the western coast of Madagascar. Renala is the Malagasy word we use for it, and that means it's a combination of 2 words, rain, which means mother, and ala, which means forest. So in the area where it occurs, the Renal or the Crandidias baobab is known as the mother of the forest, and it has different values for the communities. How did we start to work on the baobabs was not really because we love the trees. It was because we loved bats. And we wanted to know what are the roles of bats in the pollination of the trees in Madagascar. And we ended up finding that the baobabs are one of the trees that is particularly pollinated by the largest bats in Madagascar. Because the flowers on this screen, it opens in the late afternoon, and the bat would be the first animal flying into it for the pollination. But in addition to finding that, which was really cool to see the bats flying, staying up all the night and counting how many of them, was visiting the flowers. We also found different forms of baobab exploitations. So on this screen, you could see that man who is bringing straps of baobab barks that he was going to use. Generally, they use for building houses, and also for making ropes. And these ropes are used mostly when they were to tie the cattle. Traditionally, the use of baobab barks has been a traditional practice, but they used to do it only like up to 1.5 meters and only target the biggest trees. But we ran a study looking at how the baobab barks is evolving over time, and we found that people are actually starting to cut down the trees. They wanted to go higher up. Of course, it's more difficult to cut down the large trees, so they are targeting the smaller ones, so they can cut down and take the bark up to like the maximum size of the barks they could take from the trees. Other different use of the baobabs we found as well is people are taking the roots. It's still on the bottom of the trees. These are small pieces of barks that are used for traditional medicines and also being sold in the market. Other use of the baobabs is after they have cut down the trees, taken off the bark, they leave the tree there, and some mushrooms would grow out of that dead tree, and people would be collecting them, and they say, I've never tested it, unfortunately, but they said it's really tasty, and they could have it with rice. Different uses of baobabs are, then the main use at the moment is for consumption. Kids, especially children, would be eating it during the fruiting season. They would collect the fruits that are falling under the trees and eat it as snacks. And the adults would eat the fruit as well, the pulps in the fruit, but they would also collect the seeds and make oil that they are using for cooking. So these are different uses of baobabs that the question is, are these going to affect the population or not? Can we maintain it? How can we improve it? But one of the major threats to the baobabs, and that's making it a threatened species, is the degradation of the habitat. So this is the Allée des Baobabs, is the first picture that was showing up with the sunset. It was really good with the sunset, but if you look from above, it's just not really a forest. It's like small trees, big trees, isolated from in different parts of the landscapes. And we do have a proverb in Malagasy saying, "As tukana timbaal," which means one tree doesn't make a forest. And I'm sure that the fact that these trees are so isolated and very far from each other would have a big impact on their future and are threatening. And as Dave said, when we were doing the investigations, trying to find small baobabs, we couldn't yet find natural recruitments or natural seedlings that were generating on the baobabs in that area. So thanks to the support of Franklinia Foundation and also the help of the FFI team, we started by developing a strategy on the conservation of the baobabs. We were taking all the stakeholders or potential partners. In 2011, we had a workshop discussing all the issues and how we can better improve the management of the baobab populations. It finished with a book, conservation strategy that we published in 2011. And to implement that strategy, we started different actions. One of the key major issues was there was no management structure around the baobab populations, especially when they were outside the protected area, so people can just harvest them, cut them down, collect the fruits, and communities cannot really control that. So one of the first actions we did was working with the government to provide the communities with the rights to manage the baobab trees and other natural resources within their territories. The second thing we have been doing was planting more baobabs because, as I said, there was no natural recruitment. And this area where the baobab occurs does have recurrent fires every year, and we have tried planting before. It didn't work because the year after, a few months after we've planted, there was a fire, so we couldn't. The trees didn't survive, or just a few of them did survive. So what we have tried was getting the children from primary schools to plant the trees and actually look after them. And the initiative was called Renalak, which means my baobabs. And it was a competition we ran between the kids, and they were very happy. So there are two objectives to that initiative. One is to get the children understand that you can plant the trees, and also to increase their love for the baobabs. We also, as I said, the baobabs have some cultural values for the communities, and there are many tourists coming to the baobab areas, to that western part of Madagascar to see the baobabs. So we have identified the sacred trees around that area in the idea of they would be attracting tourists to visit other areas than the Allée des Baobabs. We have been working with the Office of Tourism in Munda, but we are not really there yet. So this slide shows, one of the sacred baobabs that the communities have requested should be protected. So we have put fences around it. And one of the challenges we are now currently tackling is the fruit trade and fruit harvesting. When we started the project, when I visited there about probably 10 years ago, fruits would be sold in small scale like this. But over the past 5 years, we have seen large stocks of baobab fruits, and there were companies, businesses wanting to trade them both at the national and international markets. And I've seen like before you wouldn't see any baobab fruits sold in the markets in Tana, the capital, but now you can see more of them. So there is higher demand for the baobab fruits. What we have been doing is trying to assess how much baobab fruits could actually be available in the wild. So we have been doing monitoring over the past 4 years, and we have seen that it's changing every year. And communities suggested that this is because of the weather, so climate. If it's raining a lot, there will be more fruits. If it's drier, and actually in Madagascar, the 2015 season was quite dry. We didn't really have much rain. There's less fruits available. So if we consider that every tree from the results suggests that each baobab tree could produce up to 4 kilos of baobab fruits every year, there is actually a potential for the whole country to produce about 4,000 tons of baobab fruits every year. If we are able to really manage that properly and also make sure that this harvesting can have some returns in conservation and on people as well, then it could be a tool to reduce the poverty first, and also to contribute to conservation as well. And that's one of the challenges we are working now with the FFI team and also other partners in Madagascar, with some support from Darwin Initiative as well, is to find how we could manage these baobab fruits. We are now starting with just the 3 community organizations that we have created, because we can't really control the whole country or the rest of Madagascar just in one go. As a pilot, we would be working with these 3 communities and implement some rules, and also training them in how to improve the baobab storage. So this photo shows, it was taken during a training sessions we organized in November, where women, because the baobab fruits can be stored for a few years, but people in Western Madagascar, as you could have seen in the baobab house, they have really small houses. They couldn't be able to store the baobabs for consumption for next year or any time. So what we are trying, they have demonstrated, some more experts found that they could produce the baobab powders that they could store because they only eat the powders anyway. So that this was training women in the villages to make these powders, and in the hope that in the future they would be able to produce something better, like this was the baobab jam we could take to the markets, so adding value into the community productions. And this whole thing, the big challenge, of course, the main challenge for us, as I said at the beginning, was for our children. Not only my children, my daughter and other children of Madagascar Vocadi staff, but other children in Madagascar, to step over this poverty line, to be able to be proud of the conservation, the biodiversity of the country. So we hope that this Baobab initiative could be replicated and scaled up. Maybe we would use different, depending on the situations in every area, we would use different species. But I think the biggest thing, like easy thing with the baobab and trees in general is they don't really move. So they don't move at all. You have to move them. And then I think it's probably more easier to replicate approaches that has been successful, and I really believe that this Baobab project is going to be successful. So we just find ways to replicate it in different contexts so that people are more proud and more fond the trees and then the animals living in this forest, because I still love the animals, keep them alive. Okay, thank you.
I have a clicker. Thank you very much, Judy. I told you there's a lot to each of these tree conservation projects. Our next speaker comes from St. Lucia. He's FFI's country manager for our work in St. Lucia, and his name is Adams Toussaint. When we did the rehearsal yesterday, Adams complained that the map didn't do St. Lucia justice, so I put in an extra slide just for him. So there you go. I hope you're happy. So before joining FFI, Adams worked for the Forestry Department in St. Lucia, which he joined in 1980, and he became Chief Forest Officer in 2013. He's worked with FFI on many species over his time, many trees, but he's going to tell you the story tonight behind one of those tree species. Adams, we're ready for you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Good evening to everybody. I bring you warm greetings from St. Lucia in every aspect of the world. We don't have very huge surface area, but we have quite a lot of warm weather in St. Lucia to offer you. So when I was invited here to make a presentation on the sustainable Lhasa tree, my thought was, how would I be able to condense 10 years of work within a 10-minute period, and here to be able to do justice to what we have done? But one thing became consistent with me is that, really and truly, the work I have done on Lhasa really reflects my life story. Because I was born in in a very small community near the Castries Waterworks Reserve, which is located in the Castries area. Very in close proximity to the Castries Waterworks Reserve, which was established in 1916. 100 years later, this forest reserve was dedicated to the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy Initiative in 2016. So this is where I was born. So I actually live and breathe forests. So forest has been all my life. Being there, as Dave told you, I worked for more than 38 years with forestry until I retired in 2018. And so throughout my life, I've been talking forestry. And I've had quite a huge amount of experience, but one major experience that stood out and resonated with me throughout. And it was a game changer, and which I would like you all to bear with me. Let me tell you that story, because I cannot leave here. It would be remiss of me if I don't tell you the story where in the community in the Castries Waterworks Reserve, on the other side, on the eastern side of the Castries Waterworks Reserve, where availability of land to the local people was really scarce because there was huge landowner that controlled most of the land planting bananas. So one particular farmer who always used to threaten forest officers that he would not welcome anybody trying to chase him out of the forest. But our duty at that time, in fact, my duty as a young forest officer at the age of 18 was to be able to protect the forest. That's my duty. Now this has changed, but it protect the forest. Literally, not really putting fence, but preventing local people from entering the forest to earn a livelihood. So one time I was given the responsibility to supervise the restoration of plantations where people previously squatted the forest, so we had to replant the forest. And whilst I was there supervising the workers, I heard someone cutting. So I decided to find out what's happening there. And as I entered, I stepped in face to face with this squatter. Honestly to tell you, I must admit, I was really scared. I couldn't run. So then I realized he had a machete in his hand, a cutlass, and I had to say, please put down your cutlass. And then I was really scared and I was trembling. When I realized he was scared, much scared than me, and he was trembling, I asked him to put down the cutlass. He put it down and he said, please, please, please give me a chance. Do not arrest me. I have 14 children. I'm a wife to feed and have no alternative but to come to the forest. I would not want to walk all the way there to do just that. So I said to him, well, I'm doing my work as a young man, and this is what I'm paid to do. And so I listened to his case, and so I decided to bring him down to the chief forest officer to speak to him. And then I did advise the chief forest officer at that time to please compound the case and do not take the case to court because we do not want to throw this gentleman in jail. So he came in, and we spoke to him. We compounded the offense. And I advised the chief forest officer at that time, because they were dividing lands and giving lands under the European Development Fund project at that time, and that was in 1982. So we assigned a portion of land, 5 acres of land to him. And of course, I disappeared. I went to study, and I haven't seen that man for many years. And one time I came back from study, and maybe 6 years later, I'm walking the tongue of castries, and I'm seeing a gentleman running towards me and asking me to stop. He wasn't calling my name, but he was saying, hey, hey, please stop. I want to talk to you. So when I stopped, he came to me, and he fell on his knees just before me and said, thank you, please. Today, it's because of you that I have a wall house, all my kids went to school, and I am who I am. Today, I'm able to take care of my family and everything because of what you did for me. And I want to thank you tremendously, and I've been saving my biggest dashing, my biggest planting to offer to you, and I've been looking for you everywhere. But I'm so happy to see you today, but I don't have anything to offer you, but I can go to the bank and get some money to give you as a gift, as a reward. And I said to him, no, what have you told me? I'm so happy. And this has been my mantra throughout my life in forestry, and this is what guides me. And I came to be aware that we can no longer put fence around the forest. That story is consistent with the story I'm going to talk to you about Lhasa. So what is Lhasa? Or what is Lhasa? I probably asked that question twice because most people do not know that Lhasa is traded, and the name is based on how it's traded. In St. Lucia, we call it Lhasa or incense. So depending on where you go in the household, when it is tapped, it is tapped as Lhasa. But when it is, so it is tapped as Lhasa. So when you see, okay, so the product I'm holding in my hands here, this is here you have the tree, and when you tap it, the resin comes out, and after 2 weeks, it's harvested. When it is used in the churches, it's called frankincense. So it's universally agreed that frankincense is a valuable product. Most people don't know it came from trees. It's also, most people know frankincense, and the Westerners would recognize frankincense as the gift that was given to Jesus Christ, to the free wise, when the birth of Jesus Christ, the free wise men brought on the birth of Jesus Christ. But what most people do not know is that frankincense was more valuable than gold at one time. And also what most people don't know is that frankincense comes from one family of tree called Brasseraceae. So frankincense really comes from trees, and all frankincense come from trees. I just want to leave that with you here today. The tree I'm talking about is this remarkable tree here. In St. Lucia, over 20 years ago, we recognized that it was in 1990 that it was an endangered tree species. And you could see it here represented on the stamp, one of the stamps in St. Lucia. The species that we're talking about is unique to the Eastern Caribbean islands. So one of the species from the family of Brasseraceae is only found within the Caribbean islands. However, the species have disappeared in most of the other islands. Why? It's because of the traditional and bad ways that they have been harvesting it. And that could be the reason why it has disappeared from Martinique, Grenada, and some of the other islands. The last stronghold, fortunately, has been in St. Lucia and in Dominica. But St. Lucia has the most amount of the individuals left. But it is not safe in St. Lucia. Because what I discovered is that the traditional method is compromising the health of the tree. The over-harvesting introduces fungus, diseases, and eventually the tree will break or snap because of rot and because of pests and diseases, insects, etc. And that was consistent throughout the forest where people are tapping and harvesting Lassa. It has significant values, and this is why people continue to harvest it. It is one of the most important non-timber forest product. So most people, when they have forests, you associate it with timber. But there are other products that are coming out of the forest where you do not have to cut the tree, the whole tree, to be able to sell it, but you can extract certain things from the forest, which a lot of forest-dependent communities live on. And we did not recognize that, and it is not reflected in our legislation. However, now that we have discovered that, and we're discovering that, people will go to all ends to be able to make a living out of that. But it is very important for the traditional uses, as you could see, for warding out evil spirit. In the churches, it's used. 98% of the churches in St. Lucia use it as frankincense. So when you go to a funeral, when you go to a wedding, the churches would use this as well. Household, some household would have the urns and will be using it to ward out evil spirit in the house. That is common. But they also use it as medicinal, in traditional medicine, etc. But it has huge potential for the essential oils market, which has not been developed yet. It's used, and it is a very important food source for wildlife. As you can see, the national bird here would actually feast on Lassa seeds as well. So it is performing a very important ecological functions in the forests. The question, therefore, is, can we really find a solution to this major problem where no matter what you do, the people will still enter the forest and destroy the trees to be able to get that valuable product called Lassa or incense or frankincense, whatever you call it. So here, FFI and the Forestry Department decided to try and find a solution. So over a period of 2 years, we tried many different cuts. We also had 2 areas where we dedicated to conduct experiments. And this is one where this area here, we maintain as a control so that the traditional harvesters can continue their activities, and we actually conduct research and collect information about what is happening to the trees there. And here we tried many different experimental cuts, 12 in total, in terms of tapping method, different tapping methods to determine which one is the best way to harvest Lassa without compromising the health of the tree. And I must admit here today that we actually found 2 very good cutting methods that shows very great promise. And we decided to take it and bring it to the harvesters. I want to use my grandmother's adage where she used for problem solving, where oftentimes she would tell us the best way to cure a dog bite is in using the dog's hair. I don't know the medical significance of that. But what I know for sure is that there is no difference from what that adage, because it has its function in the way we did with this. And then we realized that we will be encouraging the tappers to participate in good governance. And where we now brought them here, to use this tapping method where you have a very small incision in the back of the tree And we found out that it produced more incense, and we would not compromise the health of the tree, and the tappers would be very happy with the quantity of lustre they find. So they're very receptive, and they're willing. So here you could see the forest officer teaching the tapper in the new tapping method. Here also is where they were given the responsibility and license to manage certain portion of the forest area to be able to harvest the lustre and to be able to protect it from other unscrupulous harvesters, etc. And they were willing, and all of the tappers participated effectively. And that was a very good lesson and a very good result in the process. More good results we found out is that we use a stimulant where we actually sprayed on the cut, and we found out that we got more lustre per tree than the other methods, and also more than the traditional harvesters. And also, the more you harvest, we found out that you would get more lustre over a period of time. So that was good. But more so, we found out that the use of the resin prevent the introduction of pests and diseases, which was really fantastic. So that helped with the tree. So in all, is that the tappers are happy and the trees are also happy. So that was really great result. We also thought it would make sense for us to know and to start propagating the trees in case the trees continue to disappear. So therefore, we tried many ways to be able to propagate the trees in nurseries so that we can replant it and restore the forest areas. But it was really challenging because we didn't know that everything we tried, the trees would not grow. So we found out that through research that there was an organism, a bacteria in the soil that was very important for the trees to survive. And so we had to use soil from the areas where the lustre is grown so that we could put it in the pot so that it can actually introduce the bacteria to the roots of the trees so that they can thrive very well. So that is really good. And now we can actually replant a huge amount of lustre trees, and also the potential for us to reintroduce it in the islands where it has been extinct, etc. So, all in all, in terms of results from this project, from this initiative, is that it is a win-win, right? St. Lucians can have lustre in great quantity, the harvesters can be happy and make money, and also the lustre trees can continue to survive without a problem. So, it would be remiss of me to leave you here today without admitting some of the lessons I learned throughout the process, throughout working with forestry and throughout working with FFI and working with lustre. One of the things I learned is that conservation must make dollars and cents. The tappers must be happy. At the same time, the researchers or the foresters, the conservationists can continue. It would be useless if we try to only protect the tree and we don't take care of livelihoods. So the two must happen in tandem. And this is really a very good lesson that we learned from the lustre project, that we could not fence the forest and protect the tree. We had to meet the needs of the tappers. And now the tappers are actually involved in protecting the trees, which is a form of really good governance. Research and information is paramount for good decisions and for good conservation outcome. That was very important for us, for FFI, to help us and build the capacity within the forestry department so that these forest officers can go out there and find a solution to this major problem. And now the forestry department are happy, they have developed management plans, and they are actually implementing it, and it is a very significant part of this forest strategy 2015 to 2025. And now some of these forest officers are actually giving presentation and actually talking about the success in other destinations. Oh, one more question, one more. Is that Good communication throughout the process was paramount in order to encourage effective participation and to get stakeholders to be able to buy into the whole process. And I should take the opportunity here to thank you for the contribution you have made in terms of helping us to build our capacity and to find a solution to this major problem. I must also, in closing, I must admit that for working with government for many years and where archaic policies and the difficulties in having relevant policy in government agencies is abound, it is quite refreshing to be working with the Fauna and Flora International, where we can make a significant impact in transforming people's lives at the same time protecting and preserving the environment. So it was really good for me now to be able to turn a new chapter in my life and to continue my journey in protecting species and protecting the forest, and also improving livelihoods in forest-dependent communities. It was my intention to bring you sunshine from St. Lucia, but I failed miserably. You could see I should just remain in my job as a forest officer and forget about trying to bring sunshine to you. But anyway, I thank you very much for your patience and for listening to me. And this is the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adams. So to close tonight's evening, we've heard tonight from some of the conservationists working on the front line to save some remarkable tree species. But I wanted to highlight a few of the things that we're learning from these projects and applying across our tree program. The first point is that saving forests doesn't necessarily always save tree species from the threats that they face. We heard from Adams tonight how if it weren't for the specific focus on the Lanson tree, that species and all of the values and benefits that it brings would likely disappear from St. Lucia's forests. We also saw just how amazing trees can be as ambassadors for conservation, especially at the local level. We often pin our conservation projects around primates, big cats, and elephants for good reasons. But perhaps trees can be just as good as icons for conservation. And one thing we saw from all of our projects is just how important leadership is for tree conservation. Being a tree conservationist is not easy. You have to be in it for the long haul to see real change. You have to address all sorts of tricky, technical problems. And you have to have the charisma and perseverance to win over the hearts and minds of other people, many of whom are suffering from the most severe forms of plant blindness. We saw from our project in Brazil tonight how under Pablo's leadership, it's not just about his project, but through his perseverance, he's making a wider change. So what next? With more than 10,000 tree species threatened with extinction, there's a huge amount to do. But you'll be pleased to know that FFI is scaling its work up and tackling this head on. We have two key approaches going forward. Firstly, we are going to increase the size of our tree program, benefiting even more tree species. We will continue to pinpoint our interventions to save the species closest to extinction. We will also continue to work to save large areas of habitat containing multiple threatened tree species in these places. In 2019, just for example, we have new work starting in Cape Verde with dragon trees, magnolias looking into the threatened tree species, Honduras looking into the threatened tree species there, including magnolias, and also on Principe, where this amazing survey team has recently discovered many new tree species to science. Now, these countries aren't traditionally the ones you'd expect an international conservation NGO to be prioritizing, But they have one thing in common. They all have threatened tree and plant species found nowhere else in the world. So we're prioritizing our efforts in those places exactly for that reason. We will continue to support others to do tree conservation. In the countries with the highest numbers of threatened tree species, we will provide both individuals and organizations with support, training, and access to funding so that they can carry out and grow their own tree conservation projects. We aim to build coalitions of conservationists which are not only carrying out tree conservation in their country, but like I showed in Indonesia earlier, have a voice to make it a more relevant thing on the national conservation conversation. So this is my final slide, and I wanted to loop right back to the plant blindness we discussed at the start of this evening. It seems like this has been one of the key things that has been holding back tree conservation for all this time. But what I'd like to propose to you here is that it doesn't have to be this way. Trees are engaging. They do have amazing stories, and people have significant emotional connections with them. We simply have to get better at telling their stories. With the clock ticking against 10,000 trees threatened with extinction, I'd like to propose to you that there's never been a better time to increase conservation for these species. This just leaves me to thank you all very much for your attention tonight, to thank you to our amazing speakers for their talks. And before we move to questions, I think we might have time for one or two. I wanted to invite Jean-Christophe Vier up to the stage. Jean-Christophe is the director of Fondation Frontlinia, who has supported much of FFI's tree conservation work over the last 15 years, and many other tree conservation projects under the Global Trees Campaign. Thank you very much, Jean-Christophe, and over to you.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, everyone. It's evening of the confession. I have one to make. I'm taking care of tree conservation today, and I started my career as a vet. So it's been a long way, just like Dave. So I have kind of circular career. And then I became a primatologist. So trees were never far away from me. So it was always linked to trees. I had to identify the fruit that the monkeys were eating and so on. And just something I thought about during Julie's presentation. Let's see if it works. I didn't plan that. Julie mentioned indries. I don't know if you know what indries are. They are the largest lemurs. And that's one of the most magnificent animal song you can hear in the wild. No trees, no injury, and you lose this. Oh, I don't know how to stop it now. Okay, okay, sorry about that. So Fondation Frontlinia, basically, I'll say just a few words. You go to internet, you will not find much information. It will come in the coming months because my task as a director has been to structure the foundation, but it's focused on tree conservation. And it was established by a man who loved trees and obviously was wealthy enough to establish a foundation based in Switzerland. And he started to fund projects on trees because he loves trees. And most ex situ projects, ex situ conservation projects, funding arboretum, botanical gardens, production of flora, all these things. And he realized that that was probably not enough to save the diversity of trees on the planet. And the work, I mean, you can understand why we are funding tree conservation. It's very exciting. You have only 3 projects. I've visited a few of them. There are many of them implemented through the Global Tree campaigns, and they are all fascinating stories. So we've been expanding, and actually the Global Tree campaigns with FFI and BGCI was probably the first projects, the first concrete on-the-ground conservation project that the foundation funded. And we are going to do many more on that. And we have renewed our support to FFI and also to BGCI they are jointly implementing that. And we like the ideas that actually 2 organizations work together. The conservation work is rather competitive. Organizations tend to split more than to merge and form partnerships. That's part of human behavior. And so we are very happy, and we have continued to fund that. Just to say why Franklinia. Franklinia is the name of an extinct tree, extinct in the wild. It's a Franklinia tree. It's Franklinia alatama. It's come from the US. Its habitat disappeared. It's never been reintroduced. There is no available habitat left. It's always only cultivated in arboretum and botanical garden. That's where you can find it. So what we try to do is to ensure that this story is not going to happen again with any other species. And as mentioned, there are 60,000 species of trees, wild trees, which is quite a large number. A bit more, 10 or 11,000 bird species, so you can see the difference, for example. We would like, as much as we can, to step up and do more to support all these species. We're supporting actually the global tree assessment. That means how many of these 60,000 species are threatened, so that's a work undertaken by Botanical Garden Conservation International as well. We want to have a good picture to target our intervention. So the Global Tree Campaign is the right mechanism. 60,000 species, probably more than 10, maybe 20,000 threatened. We need more people to embark in this journey to save trees around the world. So please pass the message. Trees and plants in general, it was said initially, are benefiting from a fraction of conservation funding. We need more for trees in particular, but for botany. And I would say actually trees have a big advantage, because during my interview as a zoologist, I was asked, are you going to say, no, actually it's the same work. You save tigers, you save lemurs, or you save trees. You do the same work, you need the same recipe, you need the good partners, you need to know about the species, and you need the money. And we need far more money for trees. And one advantage is on trees, Judy said it, in terms of monitoring the impact, trees don't move. You don't need camera traps. You don't need, you can go and you can see if the tree is still there after your intervention. So yeah, that would be my message. The more we are to fund and support FFI Global Tree Campaign work, the better it will be. Thank you.